Hello, this is DW here. Welcome back. Today we'll venture into r/ProRevenge. This story is posted by Von Adler. Note 1. This story was told to me by a friend and is about her father. I won't be able to answer many follow-up questions. It took place around 2005. I believe the story to be true, but can't verify it, of course. Note 2. This happens in Sweden, where there's no at-will employment. Once an employee is past the initial 6-month probation period, you can't fire them without a cause, which also requires an established paper trail. Note 3. I am not a native English speaker, so professional terms may be wrong. I'm happy to take any corrections. So, my friend's father, since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened, and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were close to unique to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme cost. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies from multiple countries taking weeks if not months to get up to speed with specific projects to do the same things. He was also a no bullshit kind of guy who did his job, did it well, but also pointed out problems and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically, your everyday grumpy older engineer who really knew his thing and always ready to help if you ask, but not very forthcoming in team building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on as was required by his employer. He had reported this and was sure to not cause any conflicts of interest, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee and got several awards that he cared little for, but anyway, during his many years with this employer, by all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge, and accommodated his style, and he returned the favor by working very hard and making sure to mentor younger and newly employed engineers to make them effective co-workers. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm, and a new management team installed. Initially, everyone was promised that things would remain the same, but with the new management came a new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime for a more American corporate culture, with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time, before the new management realized that resistance to the new culture centered around him and started pressuring him to play along. When he did not, they turned increasingly hostile, realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers, and resistance to their leadership centering around him. They started ordering him to work overtime. He answered that he was on time with his projects, and that if they had identified an emergency requiring overtime, they would have to bring it up with the union to negotiate the overtime and make sure it was an actual emergency. The contract with the union said no overtime unless in an emergency. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate. And he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe and people started laughing. The workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. Then it finally happened. They caught him answering an email for his side business on his work laptop, brought him in, and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked the three managers in their eyes, one after the other, and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all said yes. "Are you really sure you want to do this?" He was escorted to his desk by security to leave his phone, his badge, and his computer at the desk, and then escorted out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately canceled the firing, claiming there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the labor board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that it was okay to use the company laptop for a personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on a break and compliant with IT security protocols. And the company was aware of and had approved his side business, and he was on a break. Of course, he had his declaration of a side business signed by his former manager and the IT policy available, and sent both to the union representative. Then he called his lawyer and asked him to send a pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he held. Patents that were not that significant and nothing he could make any serious money out of, since they were mostly for very specific things used by the solutions he designed and used at his employers, but still his, that he had brought with him into the employment and allowed the employer to use in an exchange for a slightly higher pay, all duly documented in his contract, of course. Then he went home for some vacation and tending his side business. He was always a man to prepare and had enough money saved up to last him for a good time, to the extent that he considered retiring entirely. My friend said he had 2 job offers from competitors that had looked to sniping him for some time within a week. Basically, as soon as they learned he was available, he was gracious but declined, but offered them to consult with his side business now that he had the time, which they eagerly accepted, at twice the hourly rate he had made at his earlier employers. His colleagues started ringing the day after for advice, since the projects he had managed could not go on without him. He was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything he had with management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients that phoned his private number were told the same thing, since his private number was not on the public registry. He suspected that both colleagues and clients spent some time and or money to find it. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at, and replied with something like, "I am sorry, you must have mistaken me for someone who works for you," and hung up. This happened a few times, and the next week HR phoned him and stated the firing had been a mistake and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he awaited the labor board's decision, but until then he was happy to consult for them, at 6 times his hourly pay, after taxes and administrative cost, of course. After a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept. And then he sprung the patent issue on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired, he was back at his desk. After roughly 3 months, the firing came to the labor board. The employer stated that they believed they had handled the issue correctly, but were still willing to offer my friend's father his position back, in the interest of goodwill and reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere, his own company, and no longer available. The labor board wrote in my friend's father's and the union's favor, and he got the normal damages, 3 months pay damage, and 24 months pay severance package, including pension, and of course the lawyer cost of the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 hours or so per week and 10 to 15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as an arsehole tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved into their own group apart from the rest of the department when it came to bonus calculations and the cost of her father's consultancy fees, and the cost of the labor board arbitration were budgeted there, meaning they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years, which was a decent percentage of the incentives at that company, making at least one of them quit. My friend also said her father usually met any management complaints with a big shite-eating grin and say, "What are you going to do, fire me?" after that. Wow, this story is good. Okay, moral of the story. Even if you are a big company, treat your workers nicely, because a company is nothing without your workers. Well, that's it for the story today. Please give me a thumbs up to show me some support, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet to help my tiny little channel grow. Just a simple click on my icon or the button below would do, and we'll see you again next time. Have a great night.